The summer of 2012 was supposed to be boring. That's what everyone kept telling me. School was out, the weather was perfect, and my friends were all suddenly busy in that annoying way that only happens when you're the youngest one in your group. I had a late birthday, so while everyone else had turned 16 and started working summer jobs, I was still 15, too young for most places to even look at my application. I tried anyway. Fast food places, grocery stores, hardware stores, every single one told me the same thing. Come back next year. So didn't even bother pretending to consider me. They'd glance at my age and shake their heads before I finished speaking. After the fourth rejection, I stopped telling my friends I was trying. It was embarrassing. They were earning their own money, talking about cars and clothes and freedom, while I was stuck at home counting the days. That's when I started scrolling Craigslist. At first, it was just curiosity. I'd heard of people finding odd jobs there, yard work, dog walking, moving help. Most of the ads looked sketchy or paid next to nothing. But then I saw one that looked normal. Looking for house cleaning services, $10 an hour. The title was simple. No emojis. No weird capitalization. Just straightforward. I clicked it. The post included 2 photos. One was the outside of a house. A perfectly average, middle-class home in the next town over. Beige siding, trimmed lawn, nothing special. The second was an interior shot of what looked like a living room. Couch, coffee table, family photos on the wall. Clean, but not spotless. The description was short. Looking for someone to help clean and straighten up my home during the week. Light housework only. Flexible schedule. $10 per hour cash. No phone number. Only an email address. I hesitated for maybe 10 seconds. Then I emailed him. I told him my age right away. I didn't want to get excited only to be told no again. I explained I was 15, on summer break, and willing to work for the listed pay. I didn't expect a response. 10 minutes later, my inbox refreshed. He said his name was James. He thanked me for being upfront about my age. He said that didn't bother him at all. He asked about my availability, what days I could work, and how many hours. I remember feeling a rush of relief, like I'd finally cracked some invisible code. We went back and forth for a bit. He told me he worked nearby and needed help during the day while he was gone. When he asked if I had transportation, I froze. I hadn't thought about that part. My mom worked mornings. There was no way she could drive me every day. Before I could figure out how to explain that, James replied again. He said he could pick me up and drop me off every day, that it wouldn't be a problem, that he drove past my area anyway. Looking back, that should have been the first red flag. At the time, it felt like luck. He asked for my address so he could plan the route. I didn't ask my mom. I didn't tell anyone. I gave it to him. He said he'd be there at 8:30 a.m. on Monday. Monday morning came fast. I barely slept the night before. I kept telling myself this was my first real job, that I was finally doing something productive. When I heard a car pull up outside, my stomach flipped. I stepped onto the porch. A black 2005 Nissan Maxima idled at the curb. The man behind the wheel rolled down the window. He had a thick black beard and was wearing a Mets hat pulled low over his eyes. He smiled, waved, and introduced himself as James. His voice was calm, friendly, normal. I got in. The drive was quiet. He made small talk about the weather, about how hot it was supposed to get that week. He didn't ask me anything personal. When we arrived at the house from the pictures, he parked, handed me a key, and told me what to do. Just straighten things up, he said. Dishes, laundry, vacuuming. Nothing crazy. Then he left, just like that. I stood there holding the key, staring at the closed door, thinking how strange it was that a grown man trusted a 15-year-old he'd met once to be alone in his house. I went inside anyway. The house was fine, almost too fine. It wasn't messy enough to need 6 hours of cleaning. I folded clothes that were already folded, washed a few dishes, ran a small hand vacuum over carpets that barely had any dirt. What bothered me most was the heat. It was suffocating. Every window was sealed shut. The air felt thick, stale, trapped. Sweat soaked through my shirt within an hour. I thought about turning on the AC, but I didn't want to mess with anything without permission. So I endured it. 6 hours later, James returned. He paid me $60 in cash, thanked me, and drove me home. I told my mom about the job that night. She was cautious at first, but once she saw the money and heard that he paid on time, she relaxed. She said as long as I felt safe, it was fine. For 2 weeks, everything stayed the same. Until Friday night. I woke up thirsty. That's all it was at first. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes, and glanced toward the window. That's when I saw him. A figure stood just outside the glass, staring directly into my room. I screamed. The shadow disappeared instantly, sprinting away into the dark. My parents rushed in, flipping on lights, asking questions I couldn't answer. We checked the yard, the street, everywhere. Nothing. They told me it was probably my imagination, or a neighbor walking by. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next week was worse. Temperatures soared. One day it hit 105 degrees. I finally asked James if I could turn on the AC. He smiled, said it was broken. Then he laughed and said, "Just take off your clothes if you get too hot." I laughed too, because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. That day I worked shirtless. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. The following day, he told me he had the day off and would stay to help. I hated that. He followed me from room to room, watching, standing too close, saying nothing. When I went upstairs to use the bathroom, I locked the door. That's when I saw the camera. It was tucked into the corner of the ceiling, barely noticeable. I scanned the room and found another one near the floor. My hands shook as I searched under the sink. That's where I found the tapes. VHS tapes, stacked neatly, each labeled with a name. The top one had mine. I almost threw up. James knocked on the door. I told him I didn't feel well. Asked him to take me home. He agreed. But on the drive, he didn't take the usual route. "Where are we going?" I asked. He looked at me. "What were you doing in the bathroom?" The light turned red. I unlocked the door and ran. I didn't stop until I called my mom, sobbing. The police arrested James later that day. They found the tapes. So the kids on them are still missing. I don't answer Craigslist ads anymore. It was one of those nights where I should have just stayed home. I was 20 at the time, living with a roommate, and trying to furnish our tiny apartment without breaking the bank. Being poor but stubborn, I decided Craigslist was the answer. Scrolling through pages of overpriced, broken, or strangely described furniture, I finally found something that seemed almost too good to be true. A black leather couch, practically new, and, here's the kicker, priced at $200. I hesitated. I stared at the pictures. The couch looked perfect. Sleek, comfortable, no stains, no scratches. I clicked on the ad, reread it 3 times. Everything about it screamed deal of a lifetime. My roommate was working late that night, so it'd be on me to go alone. I ignored the tiny, nagging voice in my head warning me that something wasn't right. I emailed the seller. Within 10 minutes, he replied. Short, casual, polite. A male voice, if emails could have one. He gave me an address and said I could pick it up that night. It was 9 p.m. I should have stopped there. The drive was longer than I expected. GPS took me through streets I didn't recognize, streets with too many trees crowding the road, casting black shadows under the dim streetlights. I parked in front of the house. It looked odd. Small, wooden, almost like a cabin in the woods, but surrounded by thick darkness. The porch sagged slightly, boards creaking as I stepped closer. I knocked 3 times. Creak, creak, creak. Footsteps inside. Light, careful, almost tiptoeing. A muffled voice came from inside. "Hey, are you the couch guy?" I stuttered, Yes, I am." "Okay," the voice said, rushing. "Come around back. The couch is there." I hesitated. Something about his tone, hurried and strange, set every nerve in my body on edge. But I wanted that couch. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just busy. I rounded the corner. What I saw will haunt me forever. 4 tall men, dressed in black robes, hands clasped together in front of them, stood around a pit with a hatch and chains. I froze. My heart slammed against my chest. The figure from the doorway said, almost too casually, "Where's your friend?" I bolted. I shoved the key into my car, started the engine, and didn't look back until I was halfway down the street. My hand shook violently. My stomach churned. My mind screamed at me, "Run, run, don't look back." I was 12, just a kid, and suddenly I was staring at what looked like a ritual straight out of a horror movie. I didn't tell my parents right away. At 12, you don't really have the vocabulary to explain for men in robes standing around a pit in the woods behind a stranger's house. I didn't even know if they would believe me. So I bottled it up, told my sister later, and she scolded me for even being out at night. But it didn't stop there. Craigslist has a way of tracking your fear. A week later, my sister and I were looking for a large tote to store craft supplies. We were both excited because Christmas had just ended, and we had plenty of new craft projects piling up. $10 for a huge tote was unbeatable. The man who emailed us claimed he could meet near Dollar Tree. I suggested that location since it was public and nearby. He hesitated, then said, almost nervously, "Actually, could I just come to your home?" I said no. Then he said if we went to his house, he could give it to us for free. I got the same gut-churning feeling from before. The air felt heavy. My stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. I said no. He asked for our home address anyway. I ran. We told him we'd meet elsewhere. We set a time. 9 p.m. I arrived at the meeting spot. He was in an old, dented 2006 Kia. I immediately recognized the danger. My sister was working the night shift, so I was alone. "Let's go," he said casually. "It's in my car. Come help me get it." I shook my head, almost screaming. "No, I can't. My sister would kill me." His tone changed. Something cold slid into it. "Come on. You want it free, don't you?" My heart skipped. He knew too much. My address. My schedule. My sister. All of it. I ran. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I slammed the door to my apartment, locking it behind me. I barricaded windows with clothing, pulled everything heavy I could find in front of them. My hands trembled. My chest burned. The air felt thick. Then I heard it. Heavy footsteps, climbing the stairs. A voice, deep and terrifying. "Hey, you still want that tote?" I felt faint. My body screamed to run, but I had nowhere to go. I hid under the kitchen sink, curling into the smallest ball I could manage. The door knob rattled. He kicked it. I could hear the metal groan under the force. He broke it down. I thought I was going to die. The man entered. I grabbed the first thing I could, an old broom, and swung it like a madwoman. It barely hit him. He turned, held a metal tool, long and sharp. I couldn't even see it clearly, but the glint under the dim light made me scream. Then, from somewhere upstairs, a shout. My neighbors, awoken by the noise, rushed down with baseball bats in their hands. One hit him squarely in the face. He fell, stunned. I scrambled, grabbed the broom again, and hit him as hard as I could. Then I ran. Out the door. Down the street. Straight to my sister's work. She called the cops. They arrested him. Tony Schelling, a known serial rapist. He had been using Craigslist to stalk, trap, and assault children. My sister and I narrowly escaped. I don't even want to think about what would have happened if I'd gone inside. Craigslist had almost killed me twice in the span of a year. I still get chills thinking about those two incidents. Every time I see a black car parked outside, every time someone offers me a too-good-to-be-true deal online, I remember the pit, the robes, the man at my door at 2 a.m., and the scream that woke the neighborhood. It all started the night I moved into my first apartment. I was 21, fresh out of college, and desperate to get away from my parents' constant hovering. The apartment was cheap, small, and located at the end of a quiet street called Blackwood Lane. The lease was ridiculously affordable, which should have been my first warning. When I first arrived, the place looked normal enough. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and peeling wallpaper in shades of gray. The landlady, Mrs. Harlow, was polite but a little too eager for me to move in. She handed me the keys with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Don't mind the noises. Old houses like this, they have their quirks." I laughed it off, assuming she was referring to creaky floorboards or the heating system. Little did I know, she wasn't exaggerating. The first night was quiet, almost unnaturally so. I unpacked my clothes, set up my small TV, and went to bed. Around 2:13 a.m., I woke up to a soft scratching sound coming from the living room. I froze, straining to hear. The sound stopped. My heart raced, and I chalked it up to old pipes or the wind outside. But then it started again. Soft, deliberate, like fingernails scraping across wood. I grabbed a flashlight and tiptoed out. The living room was empty. My couch, small table, and a lone chair were all in place. No sign of anyone. I shook my head. Get some sleep, I told myself. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. Doors would be slightly ajar that I knew I had closed. Footsteps echoed above me, even though the upstairs apartment was vacant. Sometimes I would feel a cold draft pass through my room, despite every window being shut tight. One evening, I came home from work to find my bedroom door wide open. I was sure I had locked it. My laptop had been moved slightly to the left. My notebook flipped open to a page I hadn't been working on. A note was scribbled in pencil. "I see you." I panicked. I called Mrs. Harlow, but she insisted no one had access to the apartment other than me. My friend suggested I was imagining it, but I knew what I had seen, or rather what I hadn't seen. No one was supposed to be there. A week later, it escalated. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of whispering. Soft, fragmented voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I strained to understand them. "Don't look. She's watching, can't escape." I flicked on my bedside lamp. My bedroom was empty. I shut my eyes, telling myself it was a dream. But the whispering didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, as if circling me, getting closer with every wordless, chilling breath. Then came the shadows. At first, they were subtle, just peripheral blurs when I glanced toward the corner of my room. But one night, I woke to see a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. No features, just a mass of blackness. My first instinct was to scream, but no sound came out. My body froze as it slowly raised its arm and pointed at me. Then it vanished. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I didn't leave my apartment unless I absolutely had to. I decided to set up a camera, one of those cheap motion sensor cameras I'd used for pets before. I placed it in my bedroom facing the doorway, hoping to capture anything unusual. That night, I left it running and slept, though I barely closed my eyes. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, my stomach dropped. The video showed the shadow moving across the room, drifting silently, stopping by the closet, then floating over to my bed. At 3:17 a.m., it leaned over me, and then my bedroom door slowly creaked open. There was no one there, except for the shadow. I called a paranormal investigator, one of those people who claimed they could sense residual energy. He arrived a few days later, carrying an assortment of strange equipment. EMF detectors, thermal cameras, the works. He walked through the apartment silently, occasionally muttering to himself. "This is unusual," he finally said. "Residual energy, yes, but someone's actively haunting you. And not alive. This is something else." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean, something else?" "It's attached to this building. Something violent happened here. Someone died, and they're not at peace." He asked if he could set up more cameras and sensors. I agreed, desperate for any sense of control. That night, I stayed in the living room, hoping the bedroom would stay quiet. It didn't. The cameras recorded shadows moving through the walls, doors opening and closing, and strange writing appearing on the mirrors. One camera even captured a figure standing behind me while I was on my laptop. I didn't see it at the time. I only noticed when I reviewed the footage. The turning point came 3 nights later. I was asleep when I woke to the sensation of something sitting on my chest. My breathing was shallow. I could feel weight pressing down, and a cold, icy hand seemed to grip my shoulder. I forced my eyes open. A woman, translucent, with hollow eyes and long, matted hair, hovered above me. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes, black voids, stared directly at me. I could feel the anger, the pain, the rage radiating off her. I bolted upright, heart hammering, sweat soaking my shirt. She vanished instantly. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I moved to the living room, armed with every lamp, every flashlight, and every ounce of courage I could muster. I began researching the apartment's history obsessively. Blackwood Lane was older than the rest of the town, with houses dating back to the 1800s. One record caught my eye. A woman named Eleanor Graves had died in the apartment in 1923. Her death was ruled mysterious. The locals whispered of her being trapped by her husband, tied in the house, never escaping. I stared at the grainy photo in the newspaper archive. The woman looked exactly like the figure in my room. My blood ran cold. That night, the haunting escalated. I woke to the sound of whispers and footsteps pacing back and forth. The air turned freezing. I could see my breath. Then the shadow appeared in the doorway, swirling, forming a humanoid shape. It floated toward me, stopping at the foot of my bed. I screamed, tried to run, but my body wouldn't move. My limbs felt heavy, paralyzed. The shadow leaned down. I felt icy fingers brush my face. Then a voice, clear and piercing, echoed in my head. You must leave, or stay forever. The paralysis broke. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed my laptop, and ran out of the apartment into the dark street. I didn't stop until I reached a 24-hour diner. I sat there, shivering, unable to speak for a long time. The next day, I returned with a friend, trying to rationalize everything. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. Maybe I was imagining things. But when we entered the apartment, the air was heavy, oppressive. A mirror in the hallway was shattered, forming a pattern resembling a woman screaming. My friend refused to stay. She ran, saying she couldn't explain it but didn't want to be near it. I finally had enough. I called Mrs. Harlow. I can't stay there anymore, I said, voice trembling. Something's wrong. I can't explain it, but I need out. She was silent for a long time. Finally, she whispered, almost too softly to hear, You can't leave. Not easily. She doesn't want that. My friend refused to stay. She ran, saying she couldn't explain it but didn't want to be near it. I finally had enough. I called Mrs. Harlow. I can't stay there anymore, I said, voice trembling. Something's wrong. I can't explain it, but I need out. She was silent for a long time. Finally, she whispered, almost too softly to hear, You can't leave. Not easily. She doesn't want that. I moved out that week, packed up in a frenzy, not caring about damage deposit, not caring about missing items. I drove as far as I could. But even now, years later, I still get emails from that apartment's old account. Yes, somehow, even though it's closed, containing pictures of the interior. Shadows in corners. Mirrors with writing. Whispers captured on audio. Every once in a while, late at night, I swear I feel a cold draft against my neck, and I hear a soft, chilling voice whisper. You can't escape, not completely. Some things follow you. Some things wait. And some wait for you to forget before coming back. That was Blackwood Lane. That was Eleanor Graves. And I will never, ever step foot in that building again. It all began the weekend I decided to escape the city. I had been working nonstop for months, and my therapist suggested some time alone in nature might help me reset. I found a listing online for a remote cabin deep in the woods, far from any neighbors or cell service. The photos were stunning. Rustic wood exterior, a stone fireplace, large windows overlooking the forest. The price was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but I brushed off the feeling of unease. I packed my car with essentials, food, water, blankets, and a small first aid kit. I even brought a journal, thinking I might record my thoughts and decompress. I left Friday morning, driving for hours until the city gave way to trees and winding dirt roads. By the time I arrived, the sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the cabin. The place was quiet, too quiet. Birds chirped occasionally, but there was no wind, no rustle of leaves, nothing that suggested life nearby. I shrugged, telling myself I needed silence. The first night was uneventful, almost unnervingly calm. I unpacked, lit the fireplace, and cooked a simple meal. As I settled into bed, I realized how isolated I truly was. There were no streetlights, no cars, no distant hum of electricity, just the woods. The kind of woods you hear about in horror stories, but never actually see in real life. Around 2:04 a.m., I woke to the sound of something scratching at the cabin door. Soft, deliberate, and persistent. I froze, holding my breath. Maybe a branch? I told myself. But the scratches continued, growing louder, more insistent. I slowly reached for the flashlight on my nightstand. Nothing was there. The next morning, I found deep scratches etched into the wooden door. They hadn't been there before. I took photos, feeling a chill run down my spine. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray deer. But the marks were too high off the ground, almost human in shape. Trying to shake off the unease, I decided to explore the surrounding woods. The trees were dense, the sunlight barely penetrating through the thick canopy. As I wandered, I noticed something odd. The trees seemed to be arranged unnaturally. Branches twisted in shapes that almost resembled faces, knots forming eyes and mouths. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. I'm tired. That's all this is. But the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. By the third night, things escalated. I woke to the sound of whispers outside my window. Soft, indistinct murmurs, like multiple voices speaking at once. I grabbed my flashlight, intending to scare off whoever, or whatever, was there. The beam landed on a figure in the clearing outside. Tall, impossibly thin, its face obscured by shadows. It stood perfectly still, staring at the cabin. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe as far as I could tell. And then it vanished. I decided I had to leave the next morning. I packed hastily, grabbed my keys, and started the car, but it wouldn't start. I tried everything. The ignition, the battery, even bump starting it. Nothing. Panic set in. I felt trapped. Alone. That night, I barricaded myself in the cabin, using furniture to block doors and windows. Around midnight, the whispers returned, louder this time, accompanied by footsteps circling the cabin. The walls creaked and groaned, as if something was pressing against them from the outside. I held my breath, wishing for dawn. When morning came, I found footprints in the snow leading up to the cabin, large, inhuman, and stopping abruptly at the front door. I tried to hike out, hoping to reach a road, but the forest seemed to shift around me. Trails that were clear yesterday were now blocked by fallen trees. The sun moved too quickly across the sky, casting strange, unnatural shadows. I felt dizzy, disoriented, and completely alone. That night, the cabin door slammed open by itself. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the fireplace. I heard a voice whisper my name, soft but urgent. Stay. I bolted, running into the woods. The shadows followed, stretching and contorting in ways that defied logic. I could hear laughter, low and guttural, echoing through the trees. Something brushed against my shoulder. I whipped around, but nothing was there. On the fourth night, I stumbled across an old, abandoned cabin hidden deeper in the woods. The door was ajar. Inside, I found remnants of the past, broken furniture, rotting curtains, and strange symbols carved into the walls. Among the debris, a journal lay open, pages yellowed with age. The entries were horrifying. They come at night. The forest watches. You can't escape. We thought we were safe. We were wrong. The handwriting became increasingly erratic, ending abruptly with a smear of ink that looked almost like blood. I felt a cold presence behind me and spun around, but the cabin was empty. When I returned to my cabin, I found something even worse. My journal, which I had left on the table, was open, and the pages were filled with my own handwriting. Words I hadn't written. You can't leave. You belong to the woods now. We are everywhere. I screamed, threw the journal into the fireplace, and ran outside. The forest was alive with shadows, moving just beyond the tree line. Eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Whispering voices called my name, louder and more insistent. I ran for hours, until my legs bled, until my lungs burned. Eventually, I collapsed near a frozen creek. When I looked up, the forest was empty. No shadows, no whispers, no cabin. Only snow and silence. I never returned to the cabin. I tried to tell people what happened, but no one believed me. Friends laughed. My therapist suggested stress, even exhaustion. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers outside my apartment window. Footsteps in the hallway. Shadows flitting across walls. And I know, deep down, that the forest never really let me go. That was Blackwood Lane's counterpart, hidden deep in the woods. I escaped physically, but part of me will never leave. And I suspect it never will.